I see. Yeah, I saw a trailer on the game and I definitely want to play it. I haven't played it yet, but okay, if it's a
Really good.
recommendation
I
from you.
highly recommend.
Okay, nice, cool. Thanks for that. So, okay, we have a gamer here in front of us, but also like a global expert on gamification. And I would love to ask the question to you, like, what is gamification?
So I'm a little different than some other gamification experts in the fact that I don't necessarily see gamification as a practice within itself, but rather it's kind of an observation and a design methodology in the fact that we know games are really good at creating engagement. You know, they're very good at teaching people very complex things in a very simple manner. And therefore, what they're actually very good at is making complex systems
Mhm.
accessible and understandable and interactable. And this is what I see gamification being at its core is, okay, how do we understand systems in our sort of day-to-day or business world and use similar mechanics like in games to make them more accessible, to make them interactable, and to help people understand them better. And that's kind of why it's not exactly a practice on its own, but rather an understanding that it's all about systems at the end of the day.
Mhm. So you are already, pre-shadowing one of your main expertise. You are very famous for this mix of of gamification. But also, combining it with other approaches. For instance, usability. You were
Mhm.
already talking about it a little bit. Perhaps you can tell us more about this.
Well, I think, whenever you're looking at anything with good design, it's very hard to create good design from just simply one perspective. If you only focus on usability, it's not going to work. If you only focus on UI, if you only focus on game mechanics, if you only focus on narrative, really the magic of good experiences comes from that combination of approaches that you use together and understanding how every aspect of your product, of your service, of your experience, of your game works together with each other to accomplish the goals that you set out to achieve when you built the product, or that you want to help people achieve when you've built that product.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes we, especially with gamification, we can get so narrow minded on, oh, we must add in a leaderboard or we must add in badges, that we forget what those things actually do in games, which is give us more context, give us goals, give us things to aim for, give us a little bit of playfulness indeed. And, not always does competition work like a leaderboard in every situation. It matters on what's going on, what you want to try to do, and how people are going to feel about that aspect in a product, service, or platform.
Yeah, you were talking about, for instance, leaderboards that are not always working. Have you experienced like some lessons learned and things that you perhaps see that didn't work out, perhaps the way they were initially designed, either in one of your projects or also other projects that you were perhaps observing?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite examples is actually a carpooling app, of which when they came to me to ask for some help, is they're just like, huh, okay, we've had a little bit of a problem, so we're going to add these leaderboards in. Like, what do you think of this? And I was a little bit hesitant. I was like, well, I'm not so sure that this is going to work, because what they wanted to set out to do was basically reward people who were drivers who took passengers in their car. Now, on the surface, you might think, oh, that sounds great. Yeah, okay, reward people for having passengers in their car. That's exactly what we want to do. We want more filled up cars going to the work environment. But the problem is that when they had implemented it and why they reached out is it actually didn't increase engagement. Now, why is this? It's because there was too much emphasis focused on being a driver. But in that system, you also needed passengers.
Mhm.
And so, because that mechanic and because that design was too focused on only one aspect of the ecosystem, it didn't work. Because even though they did cause competition, people did want to compete with the leaderboard to get the prize, they weren't actually motivated to help each other do that. So, it created even further islands, basically, and more
Mhm.
frustration rather than actually trying to bring people together. And I think that's why you have to always double check with, okay, what are we really trying to do here? What's really the goal? And who are really the actors in this system that we need to collaborate together potentially to make this work? Or again, combinations of things people need to do in order to make something work and not overemphasize one thing alone.
So a holistic overview, a holistic understanding of the entire system rather than focusing on one single element that might sound like a good idea at the beginning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, when you're designing anything, it's always good to do an iterative process. So it's okay to kind of have a big picture of the system, but then choose to start developing one aspect of that system or improving one aspect of that system. That's really encouraged, but it shouldn't be that you stopped there in your thinking process and you can't continue to design that aspect of the system without thinking how it will impact other things in the future or how you might have to accommodate that. So it's kind of a thin line and a tricky line about, okay, how much big picture thinking do you need to do to be successful, and how much design work needs to be there from moment one, but also how do you still stay lightweight and agile so that you don't end up overbuilding something or some combination of things that is just not going to work with real people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. I know that this might be a tough question, even though specifically like when we're saying, okay, we need to understand the context, the target group, the entire system. However, do you have kind of like one favorite game element mechanic that you're normally trying to at least check if it is doable to integrate in your system?
I don't know if it's exactly everyone's definition of mechanic, but I do always look to incorporate feedback. This is one of my favorite things to try to put into systems, because whenever you emphasize feedback, especially, is this a positive rewarded behavior in this system? Is this a negative punished behavior? Has someone recognized that you completed something? This type of acknowledgement, this type of recognition, I found is really one of the things that games have and games focus on in their design process that really boost that engagement. Because the more people understand and feel connected to what's going on, the more likely they will be engaged in what's happening and also take the time to actually understand why it's the things in front of them are happening rather than just doing it blindly. So feedback, I don't know if that counts.
Yeah, it definitely counts. And I think it also goes hand in hand also with, kind of usability and also user experience, because like with feedback, you can also provide like, an overview to a system and giving, showing people like in which direction they should probably follow when they want to be successful in your system. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that that's the goal of designers, is to make what we're building accessible to people and understandable to people, and to recognize, though, at the same time, that what we're building does have bias. It's what we think is good in the system.
Yes.
And that's also something to always keep in mind, that of course game designers do also to a different extent, but when
Yeah.
we're working with real life systems and things that have real impact on people, it's okay, we're giving an interpretation of what we think you should do, and just to keep that in mind during the design process.
Yeah, I think that's an important one also, about ethics, because like we are kind of designing a system and telling people what is good, what is bad,
Yeah.
very, very, very interesting. And also I think this leads over to my next question that I would have to you also regarding this reflection and critical point of view. This brings us to science. So gamification and science, what are the current trends in the science world on gamification? You're also super active here.
Well, I mean, current trends in gamification, I do think one thing that we're understanding is that it's much more complicated than just plug and play mechanics. I do think that that has changed from where gamification started, I mean, some 10 years ago or so, even. So I think it's a really positive trend that it's moving towards that. I do also think we're realizing that it is good at explaining complex systems. So industries that have more complex systems are becoming more open-minded to using gamification, because it's not just seen as, oh, it's play, or oh, it's gimmicky, or oh, it's just for fun, and it's making things lighthearted. But people are starting to see more that, oh, okay, if we have this really complex system, or if you think even in the science industry, is you have things like folded. that made I think it was protein folding so much more engaging and accessible to people who have no scientific background whatsoever. And I mean, that was even some years ago, but I think now more and more people are catching on that that type of thing is actually possible to do with a gamification mindset. Let's put it that way. So I think overall the trends are improving in the fact that we're understanding that it's actually more complex system design and UX design and narrative and all of these other pieces coming together. But of course, there's still a lot of pushback because everybody wants the silver bullet, the quick implementation, the quick win.
True. Yeah. But not only this, probably also like what I experience a lot is the question. It's kind of, like kind of the holy grail, which is the impact measurement and gamification. Yeah. So is it really something that's worth the effort doing? Yeah. And the impact measurement, perhaps systems also in order to measure and evaluate projects on gamification. Do you have anything that you could share with us on this regard?
It's funny because I literally just wrote an article on this topic because I think it is also one of the biggest problems with design right now is that we tend to get connected to the wrong metrics. So something that I hear so commonly whenever there's a new project is everybody wants more engagement. They want daily engagement. They want people to always pick up the phone or to open the computer and to want to interact with their product and service. And I mean, one, this is just not ethical design. We shouldn't be designing things to be that addictive or that essential in our day-to-day life. But also, two, it's going to lead to actual failure because you're not thinking about the value you actually are trying to provide and making sure your KPIs or your metrics are linked with that. You're too focused on these vanity metrics or these things that you think will somehow prove you matter. And I think we need to get more comfortable. And also, we just need to be more ethical in the fact that less frequent checkpoints, but finding ways to measure the value of those checkpoints is going to help us design better products because it will guide us in the right direction. But I think we still have a ways to go. That's unfortunately not a trend I've seen yet before people start to let go of that sort of expectation of if someone isn't completely engrossed in my experience or if I can't get everything out of them, it's somehow not enough or it's somehow bad. Yeah.
Oh, I think that's a wonderful point because it's tackling the problem way earlier. So not in like how do I measure this and how do I evaluate the impact that I had, but already doing the mistake and biasing basically the KPIs.
Absolutely, and it's a process of the KPIs clearly influence the design and the design also clearly influences the KPIs. And the challenge is to just from the beginning work that into your design process. And I mean, you will always find a way to measure it. Odds are if you created it, there's going to be some way to track this. There will be some way to define value. And if you struggle so much to find a metric that would do that, probably you don't know what your value you're providing, or it's still unclear what it is you're setting out to try to do, which is go back to the drawing board and figure it out. But we should also stop looking at it as, again, these KPIs live in this other world. We figure them out after the fact because, or again, we base too much of what we're going to do next on correcting engagement. That we end up actually doing damage to what we're attempting to do and also creating non-sustainable situations.
Yeah. Wonderful point. Thanks a lot for this. Speaking, okay, this was about like the status quo, and we are hoping that also, those people that are setting up the projects also perhaps reflect on their KPIs a little bit. So that I think that's a very nice thing to take into consideration, but also having a look into the future. So how would you say would the gamification world will look like in 10 years?
It's so tough to say because again, what is gamification exactly, or what would that mean? But what I'm hoping at least that will happen in the future, and I think the trend is already there, is we'll start embracing system design more, and we'll start treating UX and gamification or game design, whatever the product design processes are, as a really essential step. Because I do think we're also getting to a point where everything's a little bit cookie cutter. you know, the buttons look the same way, they're supposed to act this way, we do this type of styling, we do this type of leaderboard, we do this type of, you know, it's we figured out an effective and efficient way to do it, and so we're kind of bearing the role of the designer in that. And what I'm hoping that we start to do is realizing, yes, industry standardization is important, things should be intuitive, things should be usable, but that we spend more time understanding these systems that we're building or building things on top of, and have that be a real part of the design process, and that we embrace that as the role of the designer, or that that part of gamification is really the part that's still going to be there in 10 years. And I do think we're getting there. Whether we will or not, I mean, a buzzword never completely loses its buzz, I guess.
Yeah.
But I do feel like, you know, especially as things get more complicated and we have more complex systems that we're trying to make accessible, we are realizing, and we will have more tools in the future to try to make that process, yeah, a bit easier for people, but also a very crucial part of the design process.
So inclusion seems to be really like an important point, accessible inclusion, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to, and also we need to check ethics before it's too late.
Yeah.
Because when we design with what some people use gamification as a sort of this manipulation or this motivation or this disguise, oh, we made this fun, you know, we think it's okay because, oh no, it's just making something more pleasant. But it's a really thin line as well between, okay, you know, is this really ethical that we're masking what's going on here? You know, if we find this moment okay to manipulate somebody, what's going to stop us then from a moment that's then a little bit more extreme, then a little bit more extreme and extreme? And I think that also, unfortunately, could be the 10-year path as well, if we don't start talking about ethics and design now and finding policies and ways to approach this that hopefully help us, also just even well-minded people want to be ethical. But if you don't know how to go about that, then, you know, it also may not turn out the way you hope.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
let's we'll see 10 years we can have a conversation again and see which,
and see
if any were right.
what happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why are we here? Yeah. No, nice. Thanks a lot. I have one last question to you. So for all the newcomers on the topic of gamification, is there like any hint that you have for beginners, perhaps even something that you would have loved to know once you start, back then when you started with the topic of not only gamification but also like this mixture of approach, like system design, usability, but also perhaps with a specific focus on gamification? Is there anything that you would like to share?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, what I always give people the advice, if they're interested in this type of design, it's to go play games, or to look around you and notice when you get feedback from a system. Because it's not just games that have feedback. You know, our bodies also have feedback. Touch a hot pan, you're going to get feedback that that was probably not a great idea and that caused some damage. And I think, you know, one of the things that I've noticed in learning as a game designer, UX designer, et cetera, is that the more that I've paid attention to how systems interact with me, the better I've gotten at designing them, because I've just noticed and been more mindful of when I'm in a system or when something is being manipulated or changed in front of me. So it's not exactly a fact, but it's just systems are everywhere, and feedback systems are everywhere, and narratives and stories are everywhere. So just keep an eye out for them and try to identify them, because that's going to be the best practice you can get at building your own.
Yeah, so perception for the things also that are around you. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I think that were some very, very nice insights and also other perspectives on the topic, you know, not the regular approaches that gamification is like an island that you can explore, but basically like it is connected to a lot of different things, and the holistic approach of systems. Then also that we should keep into mind like the ethics of it with the manipulation, but also that these systems are all around us and that we can learn from the systems all around us in order to become a better designer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So Melinda, thank you so much for being here with me today. Thanks for your insights, for your expertise. And I would say Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, it was fun.
Thanks a lot. Have a nice day. Bye, Melinda.
Bye.